Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us for the second episode of the Musi Summer Webinar Series. Last week, we had a great series on how to recruit students. And this week, we have my good friend Rene here, who will be going over how to teach practicing and practice methodologies. She's sort of the expert in this. So I think this will be a really interesting conversation for everybody to hear. And yeah, so Rene, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. Yeah, looking forward to hearing what you got to say.
Thank you so much, Sam. I'm so happy to be here with you and with everyone else. Yes, I love talking about practicing. I love talking about teaching, practicing. And it's one of the, I think, most influential thing in my life when I started to teach was to realize, first of all, how much I learned through the process, but then also to see how there's so much more to teaching than just teaching how to execute things on an instrument. And there is a psychology to it that is so important. So we're so much more than just teachers. We're mentors, we're psychologists, friends. And when it comes to practicing more mindfully, helping our students get more results, there is a science to it that I'm sure a lot of you are, you're aware of this and you know so much on this topic. But there's some nuances that we can also bring in addition to this that I hope I can contribute today. So Sam, how can I how can I share? I have a little presentation here. Apologies for the glare. Once you reach a certain age, at some points you need to start wearing
Get the glasses.
yeah.
You should have a share screen button on the bottom toolbar.
Got it.
Awesome. And yeah, I'll let you take it away. I'm just going to mute myself. So I'll be here. And for anyone in the audience, the Q&A tab is sort of the chat. So that's where you can ask questions and post comments and things like that. So we'll have that open the whole time and I'll monitor that throughout the session. And at the end, we'll do a Q&A to answer all those questions and everything. So yeah, I'll shut up now and I'll let you get going.
Fantastic. I'm going to share this right now. Share. Let's see. This is the one. Okay, there we go. Share. And I have hopefully the ability to see the questions. Let's get into it. Awesome. So I want to talk today about teaching mindful practice. Let me see. Can I see picture in picture? Okay, launch. Did that work? Can you see it?
Yep, looks good.
Awesome. So what's something that all of us know about teaching is that everyone has a different learning style and pace, and each person is unique, not only capable of learning, but also capable of succeeding. And I think that's part of our role as teacher. So one of the things that I aim to do today, where's my button? Okay, is for us to explore the strategies that are going to help your students become more effective practicers, if there's such a term. And I'm hoping that by the end, you're going to have a clear action plan to guide your students toward a more mindful, enjoyable, and efficient practice routine. And I'm sure that you do already, but I'm hoping that some of the elements that I'm going to bring to you today can be in addition to all of the amazing things that you're already doing. I'm going to go through the material rather quickly so that there's time at the end for a Q&A session. We're going to talk about some common practice mistakes. I'm going to talk about student-based teaching practice, and then we're going to go with the Q&A at the end. Now, who am I to be entitled to speak to you about all of this? Well, I'm a violinist, and I have a doctorate from Northwestern University. I'm still a performer. So while being a teacher, I'm still a performer. I perform with the Chicago Symphony, with the Lyric Opera Orchestra, the Joffrey Ballet. I have prepared for and won multiple auditions and competitions. So I have spent a lot of time in the practice room trying to debunk all of the problems I was facing. And also, I have taught for many years students of all levels, from the beginners to, adult amateurs, college students, professionals looking to win bigger auditions. So I've taught all of the flavor of students. And I am also a performance coach and life coach for musicians. You might know me because of the podcast that I host, the Mind Over a Finger podcast. If you don't listen to it, I hope that you do. I like to think that that it's a very good podcast. And everything that I teach really comes from my experience. So it comes from performing, comes from preparing for competitions, preparing for auditions and winning them, from studying so much about leveraging performance anxiety, and mostly how to enjoy the process also, because that's very important. So this is stuff that I live. This is stuff that I also have researched. So it's science-based. And I have experienced the results, as my students and clients have as well. So I would be curious, and I don't know if I can see both windows at the same time. It'd be great if I could actually separate both. Yes, if I do that, I see both screens, and hopefully it doesn't impact what you guys are seeing. I would love to hear in the Q&A, what are some of the common practice mistakes do you observe in your students? Someone says, you should definitely check out the podcast, especially episode 181. Thank you. Is that you, Sam? Is that the episode where you're a guest? Yeah. Yes. Okay. There you go. So some common practice mistakes that you observe in your students. And I'm going to give this 30 seconds because I know there's a delay and it takes some time to type. So I want to give you a little bit of time. But I'm also going to launch into some that I'm noticing. And I focused on two only because there is a lot, right? There is a whole spectrum there for sure. But here are some of the common practice mistakes that I've noticed and why they happen. I've separated them into two categories. So we observe, I think, as teachers, mindless practice. So students, they have difficulty simply being present, how to focus. They don't even know how oftentimes. And a lot of times it's going to be our job to teach them how. It's not because they don't want to, it's because they don't even know how to. And I've noticed that when I was writing my dissertation and teaching at the college level, I would get these entering freshmen, and I had all sorts of assumptions in terms of what they knew about practicing. And I realized that I was completely wrong. Some of them didn't know even how to be present. They don't know how to listen sometimes. They don't know how to assess properly. And that is our job to show them how to do this. Another mistake that I'm noticing, right, is even when they know how to focus, they know how to listen, they know to assess, then they might still be ineffective. So they lack the knowledge on how to identify issues, how to prioritize well, how to problem solve, and how to fix mechanics. That's what we teach them, right? Now, a problem is that in the lessons, we spend a lot of time teaching them the mechanics, how to play, and if you want, maybe in the Q&A, you could write down what instruments. Oh, I see. I have to scroll. It doesn't auto scroll for me like on Zoom. Sorry, there's some answers here. I haven't quite. Focus on time spent rather than results. Such a good one. Yes. They don't practice regularly. Absolutely. Not wanting to play slowly, just want to get it done quickly. This, yes, 100%. Awesome. And if you want, you can put your instrument in here so I know sort of who I'm speaking with today. So we spend a lot of time in lessons teaching how to execute things because let's face it, there's never enough time in a lesson to teach them how to play the instrument, how to practice, how to prepare for performance, how to have deeper understanding of musicality and things like this. There's just not enough time. There's only so much we can teach in a lesson. So we spend a lot of time teaching them how to execute things on the instrument, not a lot of time not as much time as we want, I think, on how to practice and how to prepare for performance. Guitar, piano, excellent. Okay. Wonder if, okay. So now what? Once we know this, what do we do? we're going to cover some basic concepts. And I know that for some of you, it's going to be review, you know, all of that stuff already. I just want to make sure that I don't skip anything important. So we have to teach the student in front of us. It's great to have a process in the system. And how does that student fit in that system that we have? And how can we make sure that it works for them, that we're not trying to make them work for our system? We help them reach the goals they set for themselves without a personal agenda. I've seen this sometimes in teachers. We see this sometimes in teachers at the higher level when they're way more concerned on how they're going to look to their colleagues rather than focusing on the student that's in front of them. So how can we help them reach the goals that they set for themselves without a personal agenda? We lovingly hold them up to high standards. What their highest self is capable of being. Sometimes we want to be nice and friendly, and we accept things that are below what they would be capable of achieving, which does not serve them in the long term. But the opposite is also not serving them when we don't lovingly hold them up to high standards. So we want to hold them to high standard in a loving way. And then we keep the process present and fresh in their mind. So we always talk to them about, has someone set up here, focus on time spent rather than results. We'll remind them of the process, how the process will lead to something wonderful in the end if we don't rush it. And also, we don't only focus on time spent. We focus on the results, and the process will get us that result. Okay, what else do we want to cover? We want to make sure that our approach to teaching is age-specific learning. So maybe some of you are already sort of building studios that are targeting specific age groups. Again, this is just a reminder of things that you already know. But for preschooler and school-age children, we want to make this a team effort between us and the practicing partner, could be the parent or a guardian. With them, we use simple explanations, a lot of demonstrations, a lot of repetitions. We use play to make things engaging, and we introduce self-assessment mechanisms when it's appropriate for them. We ask questions, right? We show them how to listen already at that age by asking questions, like, what do you hear here? So a lot of questions in a playful way with simple explanation. And by simple, I never mean oversimplifying and speaking to them at a lower level than what they're capable. I feel like when children are spoken to in a respectful way, but with real language, they're capable of so much more than we think. So I'm not talking about babyfying things. I'm talking about something that is simple and fits the student. For teenagers, it's the intrinsic motivation. If you teach teenagers, you know this, right? Or if you're a parent of teenager, you gotta tap into the intrinsic motivation and the sense of self. You're gonna get so much out of them. You want to establish trust, and then you want to put them in charge of their learning experience. So how can you help them develop the sense of responsibility and habits? And they are in charge of it, so they feel in control. For college age, we absolutely want to focus on autonomy and self-direction. And we want to perhaps introduce them to understanding what is their tendency. Now, I want to just mention here something very briefly that I have found very, very helpful in my teaching at the college age of adult 18 and over students and adult learners of any level, is the 4 tendency framework by Gretchen Rubin. It is absolutely phenomenal. I think hopefully you can see if I type in the comment here, Gretchen Rubin is the name of the author. Where did my window go? Here we go. Yes, so the tendencies that she displays in that framework are extremely helpful in making sure that we help the student in the way that works for them. She has 4 core tendencies that fit different types of personalities. And I know that for me, that completely transformed how I teach and I coach. Because depending on your inherent tendency, you're going to be responding differently to expectations, outer expectations and inner expectations. And when, as teachers, we can understand, is this student reacting or responding rather better to their own inner expectations, or are they responding better when I set outer expectation? When we can understand where they are in that spectrum, we can really turn the dial to a specific spot that's going to be just very juicy and yield a lot of result. So that 4 tendency framework by Gretchen Rubin has been very, very, very helpful. I have a coaching program called the Music Mastery Experience. We have an entire training on the 4 tendencies. I use it with all of these clients all the time. I use it with all of my one-on-one clients all of the time, because then we really understand, what do we need to set here? Your own expectations, or do I need to lay on, on you for accountability? So understanding that from each of your students is very helpful. Now, I would say this though, for me, I find that this is helpful college age and up, because we don't want to put labels on teenagers and definitely not on young children, because that could be very, very limiting for them. So I only recommend the use of that framework for college age and up, because before that, it's very, I find that when you put a label on someone, that could be extremely limiting, and that during these formative years, we want to give them as much room to find themselves as possible without us adding on labels, and the rest of society is already putting on enough labels on them. So, but I highly recommend this framework if you teach college level, age up, adult learners, all of that. It's very, very useful. And then with college age, you encourage exploration of experience. And then in adulthood, if you have professionals, if you're teaching professionals or adult learners, they have a well-developed sense of self. They probably have a lot of autonomy and they're self-motivated. So how can you contribute to this motivation and you keep that fire going? You can use their previous experiences a lot, especially if they, whatever occupation they have, if they are adult amateurs. How can you connect both? How can you connect it to other interests that they have, other passion, so that all of this is a very integrative experience for them? And then we encourage exploration and creativity a lot. Anything else? Well, yes, we want to make sure that we do things that correspond to their learning styles. I've put 5 there. There are more, but this is only an hour long, so I kept it to 5. And I know that you're already very familiar with this, so I will go through it very quickly. So we have oral, logical, verbal, visual, and physical, right? Makes sense? And I think that as we teach, regardless of their learning style, we should use all of them so that we cover all of the bases. It's a little bit like there's a main key to the house, and then we're planting spare keys all around, right? Or, you have your main document and you've got a few copies in places. I think that using all of these approaches are very helpful. There's the main key that they're going to be using, but all of the other ways, the alternate ways, will sink in as well and will actually help them develop their capabilities of learning in another way. So sing, play, explain, show, guide, all of these things I would use all the time with all students. But we want to understand who they are. So let me go back just quickly. So are they oral? Like, do they want to hear, or do they need to say things out loud? Well, guide them through, like, make them answer question, make them tell you back what you just said, right? If they need to vocalize things, or do they need to hear, so you can you play for them, demonstrate. Are they logical? So do they need to understand the feel? I think that that should have been the oral with an O. Maybe that's a typo there because we have verbal later. You understand what I mean? So logical, do you need to explain the processes to them? You explain how it works, why it works, and what sequence it works. So be very clear in your explanations. Verbal, then you need to use your words with them, make them explain back. So sorry. So for the oral version, play for them a lot and make them play back. Yeah, it's oral with AU. I'm sorry. I should specify. My first language is French, so sometimes in the English things get confused. Verbal, you tell them things, make them tell you back. Summarize what you just said. Like, what do you retain from what I just said? Like, if you were to tell me this in your own words, what would it be like? You explain something and then tell them, if you had to teach this, how would you say it? So that they also get a chance to verbalize things. Maybe they need to see things. So then you want to demonstrate so they could see you do it. Teach them how to look at their own fingers so that they can see what they're doing. And then physical, they need to understand the proprioception of things. So you can perhaps guide them gently. And then there's this whole thing about always getting permission to guide physically student through movements. It's always preferable to have, for younger children, a parent present in the room, but we always get permission, of course. But there's a way that you can somehow help with guiding movements as you're teaching them to do a certain things. Make them play, make them describe what a movement feels like to them. How does that feel? And make them do it again and sort of verbalize how it feels like when they do it, so that they get an understanding of how to be aware. They have to be aware of what they hear, aware of what they see, aware of what they experience in terms of movement. And so they can hear, see, verbalize things so that they process it differently, right? When we have to process things and express them verbally, it gets cemented differently in our memory. It's a very great way to make sure that the student understand what you just taught is by making them tell you back what they understood in their own words. So for all of these ages and styles, we're going to encourage and nurture critical thinking, curiosity, and creativity. Give clear explanation, engaging demonstration. We are aware of their learning style. We give them positive reinforcement, but also we have clear expectations and boundaries. Now, the big thing too is we have to ask questions, and I'm going to get to this in a second. And we pay attention to the word that they use. If they talk a lot about it feels this way, or I think that, it's going to give you clues of if they're someone who experienced things physically or visually, or it sounded like, that maybe they're more oral. So just make sure that you ask them a lot of questions, you let them answer, that also you're open-minded that the answers they'll give you might not be the one that you're expecting. Consider all of the answers. It might lead you somewhere wonderful. And you pay attention to the words that they use. Ask the student to explain the concepts and introduce back to you. Ask them about their previous learning experiences as well, so that you can better understand how they learn. And then as you go and you get to know a student better, notice what gets the best results from that students. All of the strengths that you notice, you want to play to them, but also reinforce the areas that are a little bit weaker in a supportive and nurturing way, so that they can experience having all of these multiple spare keys planted all around the house. Okay, now, how do we practice? Mindful, efficient practice is really having the awareness of what we're going to practice, how, and when and often. And I think that the most important thing here, the one that we're going to spend more time on, is the how. But let's start with the what. So what is, you clearly explain to your students the various components of a practice session you recommend they implement and how it serves them. So students need to know at first what you recommend they would practice and why it's helpful for them. So why is a warm-up helpful and how should they do it? Why is technique work important and how should they do it? Why is the repertoire work important and why should they do it? Sight reading, improvisation, or any other aspect of practice. So what are the different components that you want your student to include in a practice session and how it serves them? If they understand why they're doing it, that it's not just this arbitrary thing that they just have to do, but they see how it relates to them, they will be more inclined to do it. So the what is the first thing that we want to make clear for the students. You can encourage them to follow your precise lineup of things. And of course, you can encourage them to sort of get creative with it and expand on that. That is an entire training on itself. That's something I talk a lot about with the students. How can you establish a practice regimen that work for you? I also have an entire podcast episode on that. I forget the number, but it's create your practice session, something like that. But there's a series of podcast episodes on that. But that would be the first thing I would spend some time clearly establishing with your students is what they need to practice and how it serves them. Okay, the second thing is how. That's the most important thing. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. Everything is important. But this is the place where I think, feel the most lost and stuck is how to practice. They'll play things through and through without thinking. They'll just repeat the same mistakes over and over. Like they're not sure, should I practice slow? If so, how? Right? So what we want to do is we want to guide them through questions, then show them how to practice during the lesson. And as I said, we spend a lot of time in lessons showing them how to execute things on the instrument because we want them to learn how to practice. But if we were to actually just slow down a little bit and spend more time teaching them how to practice at home through questions, it feels a little slow at first, but I do strongly believe that in the long term, it yields more result because what we're teaching them by asking them question is to become autonomous and become their own best practicing agent and practicing advocate. So first guide through questions, then show how to practice. And I strongly believe that this works at any age level. I don't care how young. You're going to be amazed at the type of answers you get, even from a 4-year-old. So how would you, now I'm not talking about when you're teaching how to execute a specific skill. That's not what I'm talking about here. Let's say you taught a student how to practice, you're working on a specific skill with a student, right? You're teaching them how to do it. This is the teaching portion. You're teaching them how to execute something on the guitar, how to do a specific technique. But then they're going to have to go home and practice it. This is when you slow things down and you ask them question so that they know how to practice at home. Okay, great. Now we know how to do this. Summarize to me how, like what you understood. Like if you had to teach this right now, how would you teach that? So that they can summarize what they just heard from you. And do this often when you're teaching. If you explain for a long period of time, it's going to be hard, even for adult learners, to focus for a long time. So I would break down all the separate elements of a concepts that you're teaching and take periodic breaks and ask questions like, can you summarize back? Or ask it in the way that works for the age level of the student. How does that work for you? Like, explain it to me as if I'm your student, right? Make sure that they understood what you're teaching. So you've taught the technique or you've taught the measure. Now they have to go home and practice. Spend some time in the lesson, teaching them how to practice, but through question. Okay, tell me, Sandra, you're going to go home now and you're going to have to practice them. How do you think you're going to practice that this week? And see where that guides you. You might be very surprised. And they might tell you, I'm going to practice it slowly. Really? How? Tell me how you're going to practice it slowly. And through the answers, you can notice that they either already know a lot or where the slight misunderstandings are, the slight thought errors are, and then you can guide them to the next answer, but start with question. And you can, through that, teach them how to listen as well. In the lesson, ask them question. So they're trying to practice a passage at home. How are they going to listen? Well, they're going to listen differently if you've guided them through how to do it in the lesson. Have them play something and ask them to listen to it. And ask them question. How was that? What did you hear? And ask them what they noticed without an agenda. I mean, there are certain things that we notice for sure, but let them say a few things before you go to the one thing that you notice the most. Let them explore the different parameters. If they say something that's different than what you expected, let's say they play something and it's out of tune, and you ask them, what do you hear? And they say, I did an accent on the wrong note, on this note. It's like, great, awesome. That's one thing. Let's like play it again and tell me what else you noticed this time. And see if they can get to the intonation portion that you're hearing. But they're going to get so much through the experience of playing through and listening and paying attention. When you ask them question, you teach them how to listen. And then they might really surprise you with what they notice that also needs to be addressed. They might surprise you with how accurate they are with going right away for the one thing that you also hear. But in this way, through this process, you're empowering them to listen to themselves in the practice room at home. You're empowering them to know that they're hearing it. Very powerful. The next thing is when you do that, you're going to teach them how to assess. So let's say a student is struggling with an exchange between two notes in a passage, right? And they're playing it. It's not really working. Don't tell them right away how to do it. You know what the problem is. You can see it right away. But rather slow things down and be willing to spend maybe 10 to 15 minutes for them to get to the answer. Now, can we do this in every lesson? Perhaps not, but it would be great to dedicate, I think, at least a third of the lesson to guiding a student gently, lovingly, patiently through their own practicing process so they feel completely empowered to do it at home. So they were playing a measure, and let's say there's an exchange between two notes doesn't quite work. And for us on the violin, that could be maybe a shift or a big gap or a finger change on the piano, or the same guitars like shift and things like this. Have them play for you and say, play, and what do you notice? And have them play it many times until they notice things. And then when you feel like they're onto something and they've noticed enough, 2, 3, 4 times maybe, then ask them, what do you think the problem is? And every time when they answer the question, if they're not quite right on the answer, ask them to play it again and notice and notice. If you feel like they're not finding the answer, then you can say, play it one more time and notice the exchange between these two notes. Then they're going to play it and they might notice something. And then you ask them, what did you notice happened between these two notes? If they don't know, have them play it one more time. And then there comes a point where you feel like, all right, they're not paying attention to the right thing. Then point it out, pinpointedly point it out, and have them play it again so they can really acutely hear and feel it. It's a process that takes a lot of time at times, especially at the beginning, but it's going to hit different, believe me. And the beauty of this is at first it takes a long time, but you're going to be amazed within a few days, within a few weeks, within a few months, how good the students become at this and how quickly they can pinpoint and fix an entire problem by themselves. So you teach them how to assess, okay, so what do you think is the problem between these two notes? Play it again. They'll play it again and they might venture a guess, might venture a theory. And maybe they're right on, maybe they're a little bit off. If they're right on, you praise, you celebrate, confetti, balloons, all of it. If they're not quite right, gently give one clue as to what it could be, ask them to play it again, and then see if they can come up with pinpointing what the problem is, assessing what the problem is. Then how to decide on a problem-solving strategy. When they start to have an idea of what the problem is, ask them, how do you think you could work on that? How do you think you could fix that exchange between these two notes? Play it again and tell me what you notice is not working well. Then they might notice it. If they don't notice it right away, you ask them to play it again. Maybe you guide them gently towards the direction where you think they should go, and have them notice it before you tell them. Comes to a point where sometimes, yes, we might have to say what's going on. It's okay. It's for you to judge, but just make sure that you give it enough time. Then ask them like, okay, now we know what the problem. What is the problem solving strategy? How are we going to fix it? Or say, how are you going to fix it? What do you think would help you solve this problem? How could you practice it? And then how are you going to implement all of this? Oh, okay. Are you good? So how long do you want to practice this? Okay, 5 minutes. How many times do you want to play it? 10 times. How are you going to play it slowly? Are you going to build it up with the metronome? Like, how are you going to practice this? But now I was kind of giving suggestions, but what you would want to do is just simply ask open questions, open-ended questions. No yes or no questions. That's not useful. Ask them open-ended questions. How are you going to practice it? Probably with metronome. Yeah. Oh, that's a great way. How are you going to practice it with the metronome? Practice it slowly. Great. Tell me more about it. How are you going to practice it slowly? So it's the questions, my friends. It's all of the questions. And it takes time, but it really pays off. It's like money in the high yield interest savings account. It's actually, it's not always the highest interest rate, but it's really well worth the investment. So if you're tempted to if you feel like you just want to tell a student what to do, pause and ask a question first. That's going to be my challenge for you, is that every time you're tempted to tell a student something, pause and ask a question first instead. And then perhaps give the answer, or guide them through an entire questioning system till they come up with the answer on their own. But if you just simply start with pausing and asking a question instead of telling at least once, you're already going to start empowering them to finding their own solution. So pause, ask a question, then perhaps tell and show the answer to the questions. This is a sound investment of a lesson time. Now, when and how often, help them establish a practice routine that works for them. So have them tell you how often they think they should practice, how often they can practice, and how long. And also, so some of you, someone was mentioning that sometimes they talk about the time. And yes, of course, you want to impress on them that the importance is not to just, log in and clock in a card in. I don't know how you say it in English. Badge in. I think that's how they call it. You don't want to just badge in and move your mouse around to show that you're busy, right? What you want to do is, depending on the time, is then what is the result that you're trying to establish. I have an entire episode dedicated to this, and it's called priming. It's all about preparing by deciding how long and how and what mindset you're going to be in. So there is an episode about this, and I have also episodes on how to establish a practice routine and all of that. But another thing that you want to do is explain to them the benefits of consistency and spaced repetition. This idea that when you sleep, information gets processed. And also when you have separation and you have a little bit of time to forget elements. So spaced repetition works within the same day if you put space between two practice sessions. But the biggest benefit is at night when we're sleeping and the brain processes all of the information of the day and the neural connections have time to be established. This is the biggest benefit that we get out of practice. So this consistency is very important. I always say 6 hours is not 6 hours. People look at me funny and then I say, 6 hours, 1 hour over 6 days is not the same as 6 hours in 1 day. And that's because of the spaced repetition effect. That's what consistency brings, is that idea of, not the idea, but the concept that the brain has the opportunity to process the information and create all of the neural pathways that help all of this knowledge, all of these skills to be really acquired deeply. What we want to do too is create excitement for the discoveries ahead. So it's going to be our job to figure out how we can connect what their purpose is to what they're doing, so that what they're doing every day in the practice room, that process serves their long-term goal. So we aim to ignite curiosity. How can you, in the practice room, regardless of age level or learning style, ignite curiosity? And I would do this through questions. Ask them a lot of questions and really try to pinpoint the things that are interesting to them and how they can create connection without these within these or between these elements. Sorry, French. Our goal is also to instill self-confidence. So that means that we're not lecturing at them during a lesson. There are moments where we teach, we purely teach, we show how to do something, how something is done. We talk about concepts, yes. But then we instill self-confidence by guiding them through the process via questions. And we show them that they can figure it out. That's also how we nurture self-reliance and trust in their self. We help them become their own best student, best teacher by asking them questions and walking them through a process. So ask questions, guide to self-discovery, show them that they can find the answers within themselves, and encourage them to ask themselves these questions all the time. Why? What else? Yes, and. So why is it not working? Why is it working? What else can I try? What else can I hear? What else can I experiment with? And then yes, and. So this measure is difficult and I can figure it out. This shift didn't work. Yes, and I can work on it. And the way that you do this is by yourself implementing this inside of the lesson. Another question I like is what? What do you hear? What do you see? What do you feel? What do you smell? What do you think when you're playing this? What story goes with what we're playing? What movement generates that shift? What? All of that. I want to get to some questions. There's additional free resources on my website for you. You could just go to mindoverfinger.com/resources. And also there's a bunch of podcast episodes that are available that cover a bunch of topic on how to plan for practice, throughout practicing, to conditioning, which is performance preparation, mind management and mindsets, all of that, teaching and studying. I have some episodes on teaching, and all sorts of other good stuff. And then now let's get to the Q&A session. I believe we have a little bit over 10 minutes. So I'm going to stop my share. And I would say that the main thing that I want to reinforce here is that process of guiding them through practice. This is the key to helping them develop mindful, efficient practice. Because when they focus more on time versus result, it might be that first of all, they might not be quite confident on how to enter practice, how to practice things. They might not be connected to their goals. I see this a lot with students who do a musical instrument because they have to, because of their parents or school and things like this. They're not connected to a personal goal. So how can you make it fun for them? How can you gamify the thing? And it could be that, can you build a passage to 160 in 5 minutes, and show them how to incorporate challenges into their practicing, but also show them how to establish goals. And a lot of time, the people who practice for time instead of results is they don't really know how to assess. They don't even know what result they're aiming for. In us just telling them will not work, as well as us asking them and guiding them gently through a process of finding it out. That's the main thing that I want you guys to walk away with today is, how much more time can you dedicate to guiding through practicing in the lesson that would work for your students while still giving you enough time to go through all the material that you're trying to teach, of course. But this way of guiding students through something is very empowering. I mean, I remember one time, this was a kind of like a new student that was coming to me, and she was playing the Brook Concerto, and we had a couple lessons. And, you know, of course, it takes a while at the beginning when you're getting a new student, and especially if they've been studying with someone else for many years. And we got to this part where, you know, she wasn't able to play a passage in the Brook Concerto. And I told her, I was like, I think you know how to fix that. And she's like, no, I don't. I was like, let's see. So it took about half hour of me guiding her. This was a hour-long lesson. So in hour-long lesson, there's some flexibility to do this. You can also do it if it's half hour, 45 minutes, maybe decide on a percentage of time that you want to spend on practicing with your students, or maybe a number of minutes, like 5 minutes alone can change how someone practices. But in that half hour, I just had her listen to it and play it over and listen to it and ask questions. What do you hear? What do you hear? What do you notice? What do you hear? What else? What else? What else? What else? And my questions were very, very, very similar. And then she would notice, oh, my shift didn't work. Oh, wow. Okay. Try it again and tell me, what else do you notice? It was basically me just saying, what else do you notice the whole time? What else do you notice? And then she came up with why the shift didn't work. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. What else? Oh, yeah. And I could work it like this. Yeah, that's a good way. What else? Try it. Practice it, and have them practice in front of you. That's one thing that's very important. I forgot to mention is have them practice. Have them show you how they practice. And then within half hour, she had solved the entire thing. And at the end, I said, did you notice that I did not tell you anything? The only thing I said is, what else? And you've solved the entire thing. And to this day, she's graduated from me a long time ago. She's a completely different field now. And we're actually having lunch on Friday this week, because she says that learning this from me empowered her so much that she figured out that she could always solve her own problems no matter what field she was in. So this approach to guiding someone through practice will yield better results, I think, than if you tell them how to practice. I mean, yes, we need to show them practice techniques, but first involving them a lot in the conversation, asking for their opinion, engaging them, having them set their own goals, having them decide on practicing approach will empower them so much that they're going to go to the practice room, and instead of feeling like, oh, I'm not sure I'm going to do this right, I forget what they said, what was it again, and I'm not sure I'm doing this right, they're going to feel that they can figure it out. Okay, let me see. I really like the suggestion of asking them to explain and show me how they plan to practice it after we've worked on a specific problem or implemented a particular strategy at the lesson. Yes, that will really change things, because what I see happening in most people is actually what I see happening to me if I'm doing a training on anything else, or like even a yoga posture, right? You're in a lesson and you go home and you're doing it and you're like, oh, I can't remember. Is this right? Like, we get very insecure and uncertain. That is what our students experience once they go home. Sometimes they're not uncertain because they don't have enough awareness. Good. How can we create more awareness for them? But sometimes they have the awareness, but they don't have the self-confidence to fix it. They think you're the teacher, they have answers. I'm the students, I don't have answers. My only job is to do what the teachers say, but I'm not sure I remember, and I'm afraid to do it wrong. So they go about it, but this lack of self-certainty really hinders the work because they're unsure. When we're unsure about something, we're not wholeheartedly engaged. It's not stimulating, it's not motivating, it's not fun, it's not engaging. What is engaging is to even have the spark of thinking that you can figure it out on your own. And that starts by us instilling it in them and showing them that by asking questions, they can get to the answer. So if you ask them those questions, they will ask themselves those questions at home, and they develop that self-confidence of knowing that they can come up to the answer. And I just want to reiterate that there's a portion where we need to teach them the stuff for sure. Yes, absolutely. So I'm not saying that a lesson is just a bunch of questions. That's not what I'm talking about. Is like we teach things and then we ask questions. How can you synthesize this? What did you understand from what I just explained? Or teach that to me now. I don't know how to play the violin. Teach it to me, or the piano, whatever. And then we get to the practice part where, okay, you have to go home. Now, maybe that could be the last 10 minutes of the session. How are you going to practice this? And then have them show you, not just tell you, because it's easy sometimes to say stuff like, I'm going to practice it slowly. Oh, tell me how you're going to practice slowly. Show me how you're going to practice slowly. Oh, they play slow. How does it feel? What do you hear? What do you notice? So we wanted to show us as well.
I figured I'll pop in because this next one's actually my comment. So I figured I'd just jump in and say hi again. But I think that what you were just saying to me personally is the best takeaway from this. That is something that I remember vividly doing as a student, and I've probably not been doing as much as I should as a teacher, which was the good teachers I had were the ones that would stop and say, okay, now teach that back to me, how, so that they had a better understanding of how I understood the material that was presented. And then of course, as you know, as teachers, the more you teach something, the better you get to know the topic. So it's pretty funny because I vividly remember lessons when I was younger, and that was exactly what we would do. It would be a couple minutes of actually going through the material and like being taught the thing, but then there was a lot of my lesson that would be me practicing that topic. And it would be repetition and pointing out like, oh, what did you do wrong there? And then I'd be like, okay, hold on. What did I do wrong there? And then, I'd have to sit back and go through it to get in my head a few times. Sometimes I had no idea. Sometimes I was like, I don't know. I thought it was good. And then like, did you notice anything about your hand placement? Or, did you notice anything about the tempo? Or and then you're like, oh, I guess I was playing a bit too fast, or I was too slow, or whatever it might be. So yeah, I think it's just funny because this has like brought back so many memories. And I'm teaching later today at Berkeley, and I'm teaching for a professor that I used to teach, that used to take classes from. And I also took classes from him when I was like 12 and 13 years old at a summer camp. And it's funny because he was one of those teachers who would be like, he wouldn't say much other than, so what did you notice? And you would just sit there and be like, oh man, this guy's tough. Like, but it's like really you're going through it on your own. And so I just thought it was kind of funny. It goes full circle for me personally today.
I remember a lesson. I was about 9 years old, and I went to my teacher's house, and he had this beautiful house by the fjord that we have in my hometown, the only fjord in North America. And I was playing the Akalai concerto, Akalai, as you say in English, perhaps. And the lesson lasted like 3 hours. I forget how long it was, but for an hour, or I forget however long it was, we played the first phrase of the concerto. And he was just like, oh, what did you hear on that first note? And what sound do you want? And well, try this way. How does that feel? Oh, try this way. How does that feel? Oh, you hear the difference? Yeah, I hear the difference. And
Yep.
like, think about the bush. If you try this way, how does that feel? And so we spent so much time on that first phrase. But to this day, I still remember this lesson. And there's an episode of the podcast, is I think episode 5. I'm not sure. It's with Marina Thibault, who's a viola professor at McGill University, and she talks about her first lesson at Curtis and how the teacher did something very similar to her, where they just spent 1 hour on one phrase. But the fact was, oh wow, this is how you learn how to listen to yourself, but mostly how to perceive things. I think it's all about teaching the students to have awareness and presence for what you're doing. So I think that's the biggest takeaway I would give
Yeah.
today, is how can we teach them that presence and awareness.
Absolutely. I mean, this has been fantastic. This is the kind of stuff that I think is invaluable to taking back to your own lessons as a teacher. And I know everyone who attended here, thank you for attending. And clearly, I just anecdotally, you can tell that the topic was quite entrancing, and because everybody has been here for about an hour or more. So quite a captivating, captivated audience, which is fantastic because this is one of those things that we all struggle with. My students don't practice enough, or they're not practicing the right way or the right thing, and this is the thing that we all know as teachers keeps the student coming back. It's that the lesson's only 30 minutes, but it's the 6 days a week outside the lesson that is what actually makes the difference. So thank you again for coming and sharing this knowledge. And I think this is one of those topics that is absolutely invaluable to being a good teacher. And just for everyone in the audience, again, I'll put the links in the chat one more time. These are the podcast link and the resources link. And check out Rene has a lot of courses and programs and systems in place for helping teachers move forward in their businesses or helping students progress in their practicing. So I would definitely, take the time to dig into those resources, and definitely listen to the podcast, especially episode 181. There's which is, no personal gains for me or anything. But yeah, it's been a pleasure. I obviously love having you on, and I think everybody really enjoyed the topic. So thank you again for taking the time.
I know we're out of time. If I could just say one more thing though,
Really.
is a lot of times, even if I refer back to my experience as a student in any field, any courses that I take, is we're afraid to practice or do the homework because we're not sure we're going to do it right. We think there's a way to do it. So some students, they're just like you're type A, they just go home and they'll do everything you say. That's great. They exist. And then there's the other category. They're just like, they're not sure they understood the assignment. They're not sure they're going to do it right. So all of it is overwhelming. So sometimes they don't do it at all. So the more we can like really impress on those students the fact that there are some great ways to do it. There might be some wrong ways to do it, but there is your way to do it. You can also figure that out. So take home with you what I taught you and experiment with it and have some fun. You are able to figure it out. Like the point is for you to find your way in the practice session, like find your way of practicing. So the more we can impress that on our students, I think the more inclined they're going to be to practice, because it's no longer going to be like, oh, I have to do this thing, but I don't know if I'm going to do it the right way. So I don't think I want to do it. Now it's like, oh, I can just do it and experiment and figure it out. I'm capable of doing that. I think they're going to be more inclined to do it.
Absolutely, I 100% agree. Yeah, this has been absolutely fantastic. This is recorded, so we'll share the recording hopefully, because I know there were quite a few people who registered but couldn't make it on time. So we'll get the recording out to everyone that wanted a copy. But again, like I said, go check out all of the Mind Over Finger content and courses and curriculum. Yeah, thanks again so much for taking the time. This has been fantastic.
So, thanks for having me.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you everybody for attending, and we'll see you soon. Awesome. Bye.
Bye.